Grassy Knoll. What?
You pointed to me, so I'm supposed to talk.
I pointed to you as if to say, don't talk. That was a don't talk
Well,
point.
in the radio business, when you do that, it means you got it. It's your mic.
Don't point to him now. He'll start talking.
You're not supposed to laugh. You're supposed to talk. Who we got in here now besides us?
Business first.
Yes.
Second hour of our program is being brought to you by Advanced Nutrition of Zephyr Hills. If you want to make a healthy change in your life, why keep going back to the same old things? Why not take a step up to Advanced Nutrition? That's Advanced Nutrition in Market Square on Gold Boulevard in Zephyr Hills, or for guys like me, Route 301.
Or Michigan Avenue if it's in the wintertime.
Yeah, really. Okay, now, our guest for the second and third hours is to be Chris Pinto, a documentary filmmaker who has recently released Megiddo, The March to Armageddon, and he's got a little conflict. He's going to call in as soon as possible. So we have a little news to talk about as well, and joining Harry Spencer and myself is Gary Hattrick, our reporter for the Zephyr Hills News. And Gary has been on with us before, especially addressing the fiasco-pasco penny tax. Gary, welcome to the Grassy Knoll.
Thank you.
Once again, you actually came back. That's amazing. What a record we got going.
Well, I figure, this is the only place where people might sit and listen to me for a minute,
So you are right. We got a couple of items we want to cover, and yes, Harry, I did. I set you up. I ambushed you.
Why do you do that to me? I only come in occasionally, and when you do, you take advantage of me.
I got to make the most of the time I have.
Yes, all right.
So what's on your mind?
I'm just, my mind is swirling with all the things that are going on. Of course, this is the 26th of March, and I'm watching the investigations finally on the events of 9/11. Of course, I'm watching the presidential race between fellow Skull and Bones members George Bush and Mr. Kerry. Yeah, you can hear me.
Yes, that was really you.
And then today, I look at the New York Times, and what do I see on the front page? I see Tony Blair arm in arm with Muammar Gaddafi.
Muammar Gaddafi. Oh, my goodness. I hate it. That is just the most ridiculous thing I've ever seen. And they're saying that Bush isn't going to talk to him, but he's going to talk sooner or later.
That whole thing is greasing the skids for yep, there you have it.
My goodness.
Well, first of all, Libya was in the list of the 5 nations we had designs on, apparently.
Axis of Evil.
From the PNAC boys.
Right. Project
for New American Century. And all of a sudden, he just sat straight up and played real nice, didn't he?
He was looking good in his garb with those, did you see him with the
sunglasses? Yeah, I saw that nice outfit. Really, I thought I might get one like that.
However, I think it's really gauche to wear black before 5.
Well, that might be a customary thing there.
But what are you saying, Gary? I mean, Bush rattled the saber at him, and he sat up and said, okay, guys, do whatever you want, check it out. Now, what do you think's happening with Momi and Tony?
Well, that's just the beginning. They're probably going to see how the world reacts to England getting along with Muammar Gaddafi before we go ahead and jump in on the whole thing, make it look like they kind of made the play first. It really irritates me because this guy is a terrorist. Now they're going back and saying it's because of the economy of his country. Because of the economy of his country, he has to help us out. Are you kidding? This is a religious war. This is not an economic war that we're in. And he is not really going to side with us in all of this.
He's going to help us. He's going to help us on the road to peace.
Yeah, right. Road to pieces. Yes.
Ooh, nice comeback.
I'm telling you, as soon as I saw that, I said that he, just like you said, I think he's greasing the skids for opening up U.S. relations with, Britain. Whatever Britain does, the United States isn't far behind, and vice versa.
Yeah, Tony and George Bush talked about this before he went over there. It's not like this all of a sudden happened, and George is going, well, look at that. That they knew all about it before it happened.
Well, here's what drives me nuts, and I brought this up to somebody at lunch today, is here we have Fidel Castro, 85, 90 miles off the coast of the United States, who has never shot down an airliner. I mean, the guy's been a pain in the rear end, but the reality is, if you compare Muammar Gaddafi in Libya and Cuba, we should be opening up relations with Cuba long before we're worried about holding hands with Muammar. What do you think?
Yeah, you're probably right about it. The problem with Cuba, what's the problem with Fidel Castro is they should have just let him play baseball. If they'd have done that, we wouldn't have had a problem with him all these years.
He could have been picked. He could have been a great Yankee outfielder.
Should have let him
Fidel
play.
Castro.
There's a funny story years ago, and I think I told you this, Harry. Gary, you haven't heard this. There was a third baseman, a rough-and-tumble guy, ex-Marine by the name of Don Hoke, who was a third baseman for the Pirates. And he tells a funny story about playing in a exhibition game down there. and he's getting in the batter's box, and all of a sudden this guy in olive drapes come popping out of the stands and waltzes out to the mound, and it was good old Fidel. And the first pitch that Fidel threw, Chin Hope put him on his rear end, and he was not liking the situation. So, he had a little problem with his control, but, hey.
But I'll tell you, the whole world would be a different place today if
he was on the knob.
If he was on, exactly.
That's right. If he'd have been just
in a couple of years
out playing baseball.
Let me ask you then: do you think this is a ruse? What's the end game to Momar and Tony and all this?
The end game, I think, in the long run, is a lot of what we'll be talking about with the gentleman that's going to be on today. It's all a part of trying to bring power into one place, power into one government for the world, and I really see it as that. People. You were saying earlier, I don't know if you were on the air when you said about becoming a jaded man about a lot of things. I've become very jaded. I've known all this was going to come about, but now I'm watching all this unfold before my eyes, and I don't trust one government leader.
Oh, no.
I don't trust
without
any
a doubt.
of them.
They are in the club. They're all over the handshake.
The handshake. And I was telling someone about that the other day. In fact, probably, unless things change and something else comes in, people are going to think that you wrote my commentary next week, probably, because I'm just so discouraged. Campaign time comes up, and I don't believe a word anybody is saying. It's just one person's putting the spin on it for them, the other person's putting the spin on it for the other people. They're all going to do the same thing. If Kerry gets into the presidency, he's not pulling out of Iraq unless the special interest behind him tell him he can pull out of Iraq. Not going to happen. He can promise all that he wants, but there's nothing going to change because the same people that are controlling Bush are going to be controlling Kerry.
And once again, let me say, as Senator Barry Goldwater once said, presidents come and presidents go, but the foreign policy of the United States remains the same. It really doesn't matter who's sitting in there. It doesn't matter who's sitting in Congress.
I go out to vote because it's a privilege to vote. If we give up those privileges, we're giving up more than we should. But I wrote in this commentary that hasn't been published yet that what happens is the choice that we have is between the devil and the deep blue sea. We really don't have...
You're right. You're right.
You guys carry it. I got a call coming in.
You got a call coming in, and I tend to agree with you that I think this is all about consolidating power. I think that they were willing to get in bed with a known terrorist to surround other areas. Mm-hmm. I'm thoroughly convinced that part of the bigger plan.
Well, years ago, Bin Laden was our buddy. Yeah. At least as far as helping us out.
And for all we know, he may still be our buddy. He
might still be our buddy, for all I know. He's just waiting somewhere to get discovered before the elections take place, probably. We need to capture him before the elections.
Well, according to the Iranians, we already have.
Is that right?
Yes.
They say we've already gotten him?
The Iranians say that we captured Bin Laden months ago.
That was out of the AP story that was not run in this country, but which was sent to us by Charles T. Wilcox up there.
Run in Calgary in a newspaper there, but unfortunately didn't make it into the FCC and managed news media in the United States.
Well, there's some questioning to do if, say, around end of September, beginning October, we all of a sudden capture him and here he is.
But nobody's going to question it. They're going to be just like the masses are happy with this fake investigation of 911. They're not going to do anything.
What they do is, as they do often with stories they know that gain great momentum on the internet, even if, it's not just because it's on the internet, well, it can't be true. How many newspapers now can you access from around the world on the internet because all newspapers are going up online? Mm-hmm. So don't say the internet's garbage just because, you don't want to believe that truly there are conspiracies out there and they are, hazardous to our health. But what happens is they'll get a story that they know is out there and they'll put it on mainstream news. They'll do a spin on it, take the heat out of it, and then they think they've dissipated it and it's done with and they've dealt with it. And now what are we seeing now except the same old garbage? George Tenet's out there again.
Taking the blame and apologizing.
Yeah, and what are they going to do? Expand his powers and his budget even more. I mean, this is lunacy. And you know that when they have these hearings, it's not there for information. They're telling you what they want you to think.
How many years now? Of course, it's been a couple since 9/11, so we can do the math, I guess. But right after 9/11 came out, the subject of the United States flying Bin Laden family out of here when all aircraft was allegedly grounded, and of course that was a lie. The federal government said not true. Everything is grounded. Now it's seeping back in. We got a cop in Tampa who was hired to be.
That was a story this morning.
That was riding on the airplane. That's the kind of music that would keep me up all night.
That's good to know.
I don't need black coffee.
All right, we're talking about 9/11.
I mean awake, not... I saw where you're going with that.
Yeah. talking about 9/11 and expressly about the story that was covered in the Tampa Tribune days after it happened back in 2001. And, of course, they brought it back out on the headlines because they're proud of themselves again. But the point of the matter was that there were flights that went up, being waived from the moratorium that was
well, it was a lie. It was a lie. They said, let's just call it what it is. They said absolutely 100% of all aircraft is grounded. And off mic earlier, you made the comment that you can kind of understand.
Yeah, I could. I mean, if everything was normally okay, and we didn't have suspicions that the government was doing things that really weren't that good for us, just good for them, I could sort of understand if some prince in Saudi Arabia said, my son is stuck over there. We didn't know this was going to happen. Can we get him home? And the government said, okay, look, we're going to waive the rules here, but we can't tell you. We're going to just get him home for you. We're going to do you a favor. Maybe this guy has something to do with oil, and they work together and they do him a favor.
See what
I can understand that.
I'd say we'll get him home as soon as flights resume.
Well, yeah, that would be the other answer.
The fact that we got
as soon
him
as our own people can fly, we'll send him home.
Yeah, we'll send him home. We'll put a sky marshal with him. We'll make sure he's okay. But we'll put him up at the Holiday Inn. We'll put him at that rotating airport at Tampa, and the restaurant thing it spins. But you're going to wait until the flights resume.
And I wouldn't have a problem with that answer either. I mean, I would, but I could see where someone might, do a favor like that. Things like that happen sometimes, even on smaller scales with people. But the thing is that the government is always, even if this is completely innocent, none of us believe that it's completely innocent because they do so many things that are not innocent. And so how can you believe that anything is?
Right. Also, the Bin Ladens were reported to be amongst those that were flown
I
out.
hadn't heard that. I hadn't heard that there were Bin Ladens among them.
Well, there were some also that left from LAX and some from Tampa, and I don't know where else.
That's bad.
Well, they're part of the family, and of course, there's no secret that the current president and his family have long established working relations. The Bin Laden Construction Company, a lot of people don't realize, built much of the military bases that are overseas. Mm-hmm. So
there's also a good documentary, 48 minutes, out of course, it can't be from here. It's out of the Netherlands, though it is in English, about the Carlyle Group, which was had an involvement and still probably does with the Bin Laden family, and for which George Bush, Daddy Bush, gave speeches and fundraisers, and the Saudis love him. And they're very, very, I mean, it's not a scandalous or radical piece. You've got guys in there who know finance and said, yeah, Carlyle Group is an equity investment firm for which George does speeches. You can't find him on a payroll anymore, but he's out there doing it. And then, of course, I watched a show one night with Republicans on it, and the one guy said immediately, don't give me that stuff about the Carlyle. That's a bunch of garbage. And I'm saying, dude, Carlyle exists. They have a website,
sure.
Idiot.
Here we go with Rush Limbaugh making that statement again that the Council of Foreign Relations did not exist.
Oh, by the way.
Oh, yeah. Tell us about how that went today.
This is great.
This is great.
I could be on the map with this one, Gary. I have often said, well, we had in other shows said, if you think that there really is a political process and that these Republicans and Democrats are really entrenched in fighting it out, then why are so many of them together in the CFR getting business done, along with media personalities, some military people and the like? So we used to go search for anybody you wanted to in politics and find out who's out there. And it was great. Go on, search for a person, bang, up it comes. Tom Brokaw is there, Bob Graham is there,
Bob Graham, you're saying.
Rather, Paula Zahn, Diane Sawyer.
Because they control the media, and their job is to go out and sell what's been told to go sell.
Then what happened was, after a while, for whatever reason, they took that search down, and they put in a Googleized search within the website, and you can't find members. You can try every kind of lexicon you wish, but you will not get a list of members, nor can you search for anybody. Mm-hmm. So I finally had enough of it. So this very morning, I sent an email to CFR.org, and I said, you said you had a list of all your members in your annual report, and in fact you don't. I would really like to have one. Could you send me one or tell me how I can obtain one? And I got an email back very responsibly and said, oh, do you wish to be a member? I'm like, this is great.
I'll say, yeah.
And not only that, they sent me a roster, and there it is.
Of all the members.
You got it. You got all the members?
And for all those people who wish to get a list of the roster of CFR members, to find out for yourself, send an email to Vyzygoth, that's VYZYGOTH @hotmail.com, and I'll ship you one out. Okay?
Is there any way you can just link that where they could...
to that particular... Well, I got it as a Word doc now, so...
Maybe scan it.
All right.
You know what I'm saying?
That's
Make it easy, so all you do is click and shoot.
And I don't lose any more money.
That's right.
All right. Also, in Down, girl.
Easy.
Oh, all right, yeah. Lady Vyzygoth's going to take on.
There you go.
What am I married
Who needs men?
Who needs
you know?
men? I'm out. So what I found there was a JFK. Another Democrat JFK who's in the Council on Foreign Relations, and that might be John F. Kerry. So now, do you think he's going to do anything different than Bush did or Clinton did before him, except run this country down, because that's what the plan is, to get us into a global government,
managed economy,
right.
Managed, you know.
So you got John Kerry, who is a CFR person, and there's your continuum.
Mm-hmm.
Now, by the way, do you have any politicians, senators, congressmen you want me to look up, Gary? Anybody off the top of your head?
Well, just congressmen, you mean, like in this area?
You did say Bob Graham, our senator, is a member of the CFR.
Graham's in there.
Uh-huh.
Council of Foreign Relations. So they go and they set policy, basically, is what they do.
Yeah, we got Dan Burton from Indiana, congressman. We got Ziggy Brzezinski, Joe Califano, Frank Carlucci of Carlisle and CIA fame.
How about Paul Tagliabue?
Yeah.
Paul
Dick
Tagliabue.
Army?
Huh?
Dick Army? Is he in there?
Who? Dick Army?
The NFL commissioner is on the Council of Foreign Relations.
No, Army is not in.
Okay.
I'm not.
For probably obvious
Paul
reasons.
Tagliabue is on the CFR.
Yeah, Paul Tagliabue, the president of the or the commissioner of the National Football
League is on the Council of Foreign Relations.
Oh my goodness! Yeah,
you got to wonder
we really need him there. Yeah.
But you know, and then of course they got Lord Robertson, who's the head of NATO. What's that about? Michael Eisner, got to have the entertainment factor.
Did Carter manage to stay off that list?
Who?
Jimmy Carter managed to stay off.
No, Jimmy and Hotting are in there.
Both in there.
I tell you what, let me hand this across the board.
Yeah, let's take a look at this list. There you go. That was pretty nice of them to send that list, actually. Yeah. This is CFR.org, by the way, guys. You can go to this website. And they are the Council of Foreign Relations, and their job, they'll tell you their own website, is to shape worldwide opinion, and these are the members. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, Hotting Carter's in there. Jimmy Carter's in there.
It is amazing. It's amazing to me there's this many people
that think that, you know, and their names, Bloomberg. There you go. David Bloom. David Bloom was the NBC guy.
Yes, the late
NBC,
David Bloom.
David Bloom was the NBC news guy.
And joining us, Chris, by the way, is Gary Hattrick, a reporter from the Zephyr Hills News, and also my partner, Harry Spencer. And welcome very, very warmly to the Grassy Knoll, Chris.
Well, hey there. It's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
All right. When we first started a correspondence, it was instigated by Rita from Cephas Ministry.
Right.
And she gave me the tape, and I was circumspect, because you never know what you're going to get. And I said as much, and you were like, hey, that's fine. You don't agree with it? That's fine, too. And you were very egalitarian about that. But when I saw it, I loved it. And it's right on the money. Unfortunately, wouldn't you say that this is going to come as a bit of a shock to many Christians, evangelicals?
I would say so, definitely. I was really surprised. I go to a church where I think the congregation is pretty discerning, and they're not ignorant of what's going on in the world by and large. But when they saw Megiddo and they saw all the evidence on the New World Order specifically and all the quotes and so on, stuff that I had taken for granted for a number of years, and I know somebody like yourself probably takes a lot of that information for granted, they were largely unaware. I mean, they were really surprised that there is as much evidence as there is, and that it's so abundant, not just that there's abundant evidence, but that it reaches the highest offices in the world.
Right.
That so many, presidents and congressmen and politicians and judges and, people from the highest stations, governmentally speaking, and some, you have guys like Walter Cronkite in his book A Reporter's Life talking about the need for, one world government and so on. So a lot of people were just really stunned that this movement, permeates so many different areas. And then you've got heroes like Albert Einstein. I know a number. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Oh no, I'm saying Nehru and a number of them that you list in that. Go ahead.
Yeah. People just very, very stunned. People that you admire and so on, that have all spoken about this movement, spoken about it in, an extreme. Einstein saying that there's no salvation for the human race outside, the development of a world government. These are very bold declarations, and they come from many different sources. But yeah, I think you're right. For the church-going evangelical community, from what I've seen, my own father, now, although he's not really an evangelical, he's sort of he's always been Catholic, my whole life generally, but he's been more of a traditional Catholic, but has come out of that and has become more involved in biblical Christianity, for which I'm very thankful. But when he saw the documentary here just 5-6 months ago, he had never heard of the Illuminati, which was a name that I had taken for granted for better than 5 years now. So, or it was something I'd even heard about when I was in high school years ago. But there are people who have no knowledge, and I would say it would comprise a vast majority of Americans. People that I encounter on a regular basis who encounter this documentary are just shocked. Although in the community of people like yourself who research this kind of thing, we tend to take it for granted. A lot of the quotes we've seen over and over and over again, but there's still, I think, a large majority of the American population that is still somewhat ignorant of these things.
For a lot of us, I didn't really want to find what I was looking for, more or less, but I had to check things out because that's the nature. I mean, I'm a former reporter, whatever that means, but I heard some things, and I said, well, this is true. We got problems, but maybe it's just, lunacy. And I began slowly. I had heard Alex Jones. In fact, are you familiar with Alex Jones?
I am.
Okay. And I said, this guy's whack-a-ding-hoy. And then I checked it out, and it's like, well, no, and that's what began this. And I went to the original books that were written by a lot of New World Order proponents throughout the century, and it's like, well, there it is, folks. I mean, they never really broadcasted that it was out there,
right?
But they did lay out the plans. Tell me how you first came upon realizing that things do go bump in the night, and we've got a problem with Luciferian New World Order.
Well, it's been almost 5 years now. I was a Christian for a number of years and really had no interest in anything having to do with the occult, anything having to do with secret society. Not only did I not want to have anything to do with them, I didn't want to know about them. And I didn't do this kind of research initially. And I just loved the idea of reading my Bible and being a Christian and going to church and, just following after the Lord and just that's it. But one day I was over at a friend's house. We were spending some time in fellowship. And these were, convicted Christians who, I believe were very sincere in their faith. And as I was leaving, they handed me this video called Rock and Roll Sorcerers of the New Age Revolution. And I looked at the title and I thought, oh my gosh, I don't know. I don't know if I can watch this because it reminded me of the kind of stuff that I would see in high school, and I went to high school in northern Alabama. So if you can just imagine.
Oh, we can.
Yeah. Like, Southern Baptist view on rock music always seemed to me very extreme. And I thought, oh no, what am I going to say? But they did not push this video on me. They said, hey, Chris, we thought you might want to check this out. So I said, oh, okay. So I took it, and it was this 2-tape video presentation. And I thought, well, you know what? I'll go home. I'll watch maybe 15 minutes of it. And so I got home, and I was getting ready to go to the gym, and I popped in the first tape just to watch it. I was going to stretch out and watch 15 minutes. And then this pastor comes on, Pastor Joe Schimmel, great guy, and he comes on, and he's a very serious man, and not at all, given to extremes. I don't think so, anyway. He didn't come across that way to me. And he starts quoting now prophecies from the Bible. And the one that I think stuck out to me the most, when he starts talking, he's quoting from the book of Revelation, where it talks about these demonic spirits that go forth unto the kings of the earth and the whole world to gather them together. And then it goes on, it says, and he gathered them together at that place called in the Hebrew tongue Armageddon. And he talked about how this gathering of the nations was happening at many different levels. It was happening politically, it was happening, through world religion and so on, but that his presentation focused specifically on how this movement was working spiritually through the music industry. And he exposes the demonic elements and how there's all these different musical artists, people that you wouldn't suspect, everybody from the Beatles to Elvis Presley, and everybody in between, that are involved in these various layers of occultism and in some cases outright Satanism, and they're all working together to bring about this one world order. And I think this presentation was the first time that I consciously remember hearing the phrase, the New World Order. And it seems like the kind of thing I had heard before, but I never paid much attention to it. And that was when I really, was really alarmed by it. But my 15 minutes turned into, 3.5 hours, and I couldn't get up. I was just so stunned by all of the information, and realizing that these people that I took for granted in everyday life, in the entertainment industry, and some of them politically, because he pointed out people like President, George Bush Sr., and so on, that this was a gigantic movement. And I thought, what have I been doing for, at that point, 30 some odd years of my life, not to have known about any of these things that are going on? So I could totally relate to somebody who's hearing this information for the first time, because it's still only about 4 or 5 years old for me. And so when I set out to make Megiddo, I was compelled to find a way to simplify the information so that somebody who knows absolutely nothing about this could watch this presentation and have hopefully just a basic fundamental understanding of where these things are prophesied in the Bible, and then just an understanding of the basics of why so many people are pointing to this movement, that this is in fact the fulfillment of God's prophecies. So that's how it came about.
This show was never really conceived to be a necessarily Christian show. And to Harry Spencer, his predecessor's credit, Dr. Daffodil Swain, and don't ask me about that, he was the one who thought that we should go up with some kind of alternative news. However, I must say, we have atheists that listen and are very fair with us. They call us Christians with an open mind, okay?
Okay.
But not that I can, it's their choice to be atheist. We've got news to impart, and a lot of them are on the same page with that. However, this does have a spiritual component to it, and if people realize that it's the greatest conspirator in the world who has orchestrated this, and that's Satan himself. But if they don't want to go there, I say, okay, listen, we still have secular elements of government that we're watching happen, and they're all right with that. To me, you're missing the big picture, but that's their choice, and we understand that.
Right.
But even people in the church, when you say, listen, what makes you think that this isn't coming from the greatest liar there ever was, and that you've got problems inside the church, and these warnings of what's happened within congregations and with evangelists? What's your feelings on that as far as how receptive people are to say, listen, he said he was going to pull this off, and he's trying to do it right now?
Well, in terms of deception from like a church level, I think any Christian who's reading their Bible should consider all the warnings, because throughout the New Testament, I think every one of the writers of the New Testament, whether they're quoting Jesus or whether they're writing to the churches, they warn about deception inside the church. Jesus said, take heed that no man deceive you by any means, for many shall come, he said, many shall come in my name and shall deceive many. Broad is the way that leads to destruction, and he says narrow is the way that leads to life, and few there be that go that way. So the true teachers, it would stand to reason with that statistic, those that are true in their teaching and their representation of Jesus Christ, would be on the fewer side, and those who are false, at least just from the outline that we're given, would be in the many category. So I would think that churches would be very, very careful and very discerning, although I know that that's not always the case, and it's quite often not the case. But all of the New Testament writers, Peter and Paul and Jude and John, are all warning the churches about deceivers. And the way that they're talking about them, these men are not just men who think they're doing the right thing and they just happen to be wrong, while they're doing it. These are men who are willfully lying and cheating and manipulating those in the churches towards some diabolical end. And in fact, Jude says of them, these guys are so bad, he calls them clouds without water, And he says, for whom is reserved the blackness of darkness forever. For me, it's like one of the most chilling phrases I find anywhere in the Bible. But these men are so wicked that reserved unto them is the blackness of darkness forever. It's a powerful statement. It's a powerful warning throughout. I mean, Paul, when he's leaving the Ephesian elders, he says that he did not cease to warn them for years, night and day with tears, that grievous wolves would enter in, not sparing the flock. And so much of what I have seen and uncovered, and we try to show this in Megiddo, but there's a lot more evidence than we were able to show. We take 2 hours and 15 minutes. I could have easily gone on for 5 hours. But this movement, religion, is a key factor. Anybody who's studying the New World Order and doesn't understand the importance of world religion, I think is missing, and one of the most singularly important elements. And that these guys are embracing world religions with a very specific agenda, the idea of ultimately uniting them and generating or creating a single system of worldwide worship. Now, this is clearly prophesied in the Bible. Concerning, you talked about those, people who are not necessarily Christians, and they, but they still are aware of things at a political level and so on. I encountered a bunch of these guys some time ago. Is it okay if I talk about that for a minute, Viz?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
I wanted to say I encountered some of these guys like a year and a half, 2 years ago at a conspiracy con in...
Con out in Santa Cruz out there or something?
I think it's Santa Clara.
Santa Clara, right.
Up in Northern California. And I went up there, and it was a really powerful experience. Now, I go up there as a Christian guy, and I'm dealing with guys who are mainly non-Christian guys, but they all, guys like Ted Gunderson, guys like Anthony J. Hilder, Jordan Maxwell was there. There was a host of people who teach on this stuff. And they do it mainly from, I would say, an atheist view. And their spirituality it's very New Age, and they pride themselves on knowing the truth about what's really going on in America. And they point to, how the American people have been deceived, they're duped, they're the sheeple is a common, phrase. Yep. They don't know what's going on and all this other kind of stuff. Meanwhile, then they turn around and they have their astrology booths where they're having palm readings and people reading their aura, or they'll have a seminar where they, glorify the Beatles and talk about, all the powerful meaning in the Beatles' music in acceptance of these things, okay, not realizing that the Beatles were part of the same satanic agenda that's been working for the New World Order for decades, okay? Mm-hmm. The Beatles were into, if you look on the back of their the cover, rather, of their Sgt. Pepper Lonely Hearts Club Band album, you'll find in their Magic Club that's standing behind them, you find Aleister Crowley, the Satanist. You find Karl Marx. You find Jane Mansfield, who was a high priestess in the Satanic Church. All of these characters that had a lot of meaning for them. Mm-hmm. And if you study the Beatles' music and their writings and so on, they were working toward this worldwide revolution of evil that goes hand in hand with this New World Order movement. But go ahead.
All right, let me just stop you there. Hold on to that thought, because I just want to go and digress for a second.
Okay.
Have you ever read Conspirators' Hierarchy by Dr. John Coleman?
I have not.
All right, I'm going to ship that to you.
Okay.
And you should see what he says about who is behind the Beatles. And of course, you're not even touching upon all the think tanks like Tavistock, Stanford Institute, and the like. So anyway, yes, Coleman seems a little bit out there. He's a British Christian who was in British intelligence, but he's on board with you also that they were orchestrated to get a certain thing done.
Oh yeah, totally. And these guys who are, on the one hand, they're exposing the New World Order at a political level, but because they don't recognize the spiritual side of it, that there are dark forces at work. I mean, so dark. At one point, I think it's John Goldman. I could be wrong about that, but I think it's mentioned in two of the biographies on John Lennon, how Yoko Ono went down to South America and paid a black magic witch $60,000 to perform this satanic sacrifice to ensure the future of John Lennon's career. I mean, if these guys were into stuff this dark, which, I mean, to my thinking, it doesn't really get too much worse than that. But this is who these guys were. And they're not alone. There are many others who work in conjunction with them. And the most chilling part for me when I first saw this video, years ago, was that these men, many of them, seem to be very aware of what they're doing. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. They're not just going along with something, by osmosis. They're very aware that what they're doing is evil, that what they're doing is deceptive, and they are trying to draw, the innocent people, the unsuspecting people of the world into this web of treachery.
We're back to the Grassy Knoll, and Harry, you're looking at me with a...
You need some help with some bumper music? I've got a pretty good selection.
Yeah, I know. That's why I don't want it. I've heard it.
This stuff is a little too celestial for...
It's peaceful. It's peaceful. Chris Pinto with us on the Grassy Knoll. You're listening to AM 1350 WDCF, AM 1400 WZHR, Dade City, Zephyr Hills.
Too celestial for Dade City.
And New Tampa, and we throw that in for the urbane element. Chris, before we go on any further, it may be premature, but I still think we should get some information out on how you can order the documentary. And is it on VHS only?
No, we have it available on VHS and DVD.
All right, and how can people go about ordering that film?
You can call our production company, Adullam Films, at, we have a toll-free number, which is 888-780-5049, or you can go to our website, which is www.adullamfilms, ADULLAMFILMS, adullamfilms.org. And you can either call us or just go to our website, and we have the copies available there.
I would like them to know a little bit about you without taking away from discussing the film to a certain extent. But do you have a filmmaking background? I mean, have you been out there in L.A. for that express purpose?
You know what? I came out here for that purpose. I was in New York for a couple of years before I came out here. Before that, I was in Atlanta. I pursued independent filmmaking for probably... I started out on stage as an actor. Went to, you guys are on the East Coast, you may know the North Carolina School of the Arts, which it's an acting conservatory, great school. I really enjoyed my time there. But I studied acting, and then I got into playwriting and then screenwriting and then independent filmmaking, and just spent years pursuing independent projects on stage and on film and video and so on. And when I was about 30 years old, that was when God turned my life around, and I just came to the point where I realized the vanity of the life I was living, and the Lord turned me around, and I gave my heart to Jesus Christ, and then He set me about to do work for Him. So from that point till now, and I'll be 37 in April, if you're wondering.
Yeah, how old are you?
Yeah. So from then to now, I've been just pursuing what work I think the Lord wants me to do. And that's what ultimately, I mean, the first couple of years I was stumbling around doing these, different projects and so on. And then finally when I saw the video that I described to you, it just sort of, as I prayed about it and pursued it and so on, it just seemed like the Lord was opening up all the doors in that direction. And so I just went forward with it. And here we are. So yeah, I've been an artist since I was a kid. I love graphic art, and I love creativity, and acting and writing and all that kind of stuff. And now I just try to use it to the best of my ability to try and glorify God and to be an oracle, to speak out about these things to others.
Well, I have to admit that documentary, I mean, it confirmed what I had already found. And so for that matter, it was very reassuring that, okay, yes, there's more than a few of us that feel the way that you do. But would you speak to the title and exactly what that means?
Megiddo, the March to Armageddon. The name Megiddo is the root word for Armageddon. Megiddo is the valley where Armageddon takes place. And the word Armageddon comes from, I think it's the Hebrew word, Har Megiddon, which means the hill or tell or high point of Megiddo, or mound of Megiddo. And apparently Megiddo, according to a couple of sources, I think is at this point built on top of somewhere between 10 and 25 different cities, so there's many layers to it, which for me is very symbolic. So it's a place that, is built on these many layers, and it's where all the nations ultimately will gather. It's where God gathers all nations at Armageddon. And so Megiddo is sort of a symbol for that gathering of all nations. And it just goes back to that passage in the book of Revelation that talks about, gathering them all together. And that's what the Megiddo series, because we've planned this out, we've been developing it for about 4 years, 4.5, to be a 5-part series. Part 1 is on the New World Order, which is the one that you saw. We're planning to release Part 2 this summer, which covers the New Age movement. But the theme that unifies them all, and then Part 3 will be on Antichrist and so on, it goes on. But the theme that defines them all is this idea of this unification movement and how it's working at so many different levels. And that's going to be our focus as we go throughout this series, and I'm going to try and keep it there so that we can be consistent and show a through line, because it really does affect just about every area of our lives to a greater or lesser degree.
I want to remind people that they can instant message us on AM 1350 WDCF, and I have one right now, and I'm going to read this cold, so bear with me. It says, considering the fact that a battle literally taking place in the Valley of Megiddo with that number of people is the same as moving the entire population of the U.S. onto Long Island along with their possessions, their material possessions, do you seriously think that this is reasonable to assume that this could happen rather than having it take place on a global scale, rather than a specific location? I believe that the messenger was stating that, do you think there's going to be a literal battle in Megiddo itself, the specific location, or is this somewhat metaphorical?
I believe it's a combination of both. Empires are defined by their leaders, biblically, from a biblical perspective. And I think it's important to, when trying to interpret what's written in the Bible, to look to the Bible, to interpret, let Scripture interpret Scripture, as it were. If you look in the Old Testament at the 4 world empires, this is something we talk about in Megiddo. The first empire that's named in Daniel's prophecy is ancient Babylon. And the way that Daniel unfolds the prophecy, he's describing this statue, right? And the statue starts out with his head of gold. And Daniel says to Nebuchadnezzar, he says, you, O king, you, O king, are this head of gold. And he says, and after you shall come another kingdom. So Nebuchadnezzar, he's pointing to Nebuchadnezzar, the king, and he says, you are what? This kingdom, essentially. So the kingdom is defined, and you find this throughout the Scripture. The kingdoms are defined by their leaders. So I don't necessarily think that literally all the entire population of the earth would have to be present in the Valley of Megiddo in order to say, spiritually speaking, that all nations were gathered at Megiddo. I think you could have the world leaders there and their armies and so on, whether the rest of the world was physically there or not. But spiritually speaking, like when Paul writes to the different churches, he's writing and he's saying, I'm with you in spirit, as it were. And so the decisions that they make, for example, when they're going to cast out the guy who is committing fornication with his father's wife, he says, together with my spirit, okay, go ahead and, put that wicked person from you. And so I think that there's just a deeper meaning to it. There is a certain metaphorical meaning to it, but at the same time, I do believe it's going to have a literal and physical manifestation as well, if that makes sense.
Oh, it does, without a doubt, and I think you've answered the messenger's question.